Good evening and welcome to the second meeting in our inaugural Washington Jefferson Symposium on Democracy. I want to extend a special welcome to those who are watching on live stream and to those who might be viewing the video recording of this event as well. We decided to convene a symposium on democracy for a number of reasons. Certainly we believe it's a timely topic at the present time, and perhaps it always is a timely topic. But also because we believe that at Washington and Jefferson College, we have a certain obligation to be a participant and an active contributor to the discussion about the state of democracy in our country and in the world. I think one reason for that is that this is a college that was founded by people who had in mind at our very founding that this was to be an institution that would prepare citizens to participate actively and responsibly in a very new experiment with a new republic. And so you might say that it's in our DNA as a college to be a place that convenes the sort of conversations that we're having this week about democracy. One of the themes or threads that's been running through the conversations that began last evening is one that I think would resonate quite well with the founders of our country and of our college, and that is that democracy is always a fragile thing. That it is easier to establish a democracy than to sustain it. That there have been many more experiments with democracy that have failed in the world than have succeeded. And we've seen that even in recent years, as we imagine some of the movements for change, the Arab Spring, for example, where we've seen great optimism and hope for majority rule that has ultimately devolved into something less than what we might imagine a functioning democracy might be. And so we're exploring through this symposium questions about what does it take to maintain and nurture a successful democratic society. We believe that that's part of the mission of this college. Our mission statement calls us to graduate students who are responsible citizens, who are people of uncommon integrity. We know that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by understanding the role of a citizen and how we might all contribute what we bring to the table as we think about the ways that we help to nurture democracy. And so we have speakers and panelists who are helping us think from the lenses of various disciplines. Tonight, we're going to think a bit about economics. I had the opportunity for about 10 years to work in South Africa on a continuing basis. And during that time, worked with a number of the people who were instrumental in bringing about the new democracy in South Africa and framing the new constitution there at the time that apartheid collapsed and a new government and a new vision for the country emerged. And what they discovered there was that it's far easier to create a system where everybody participates in democracy by having a vote than it is to create a system where everybody participates equally in the economy. And so in South Africa today, we see that the democratic vision of the country is under great stress because the country is yet to figure out how to bring more people into the economy in meaningful ways. And there's a growing sense of frustration that the reforms that led to democracy haven't really benefited people economically, financially in their own lives. And so that seems to be a theme that is important for us to think about, even in our own country. And I'm very pleased that our speaker this evening is going to talk with us about this question of economic inequality and the disparity between rich and poor, and how this might actually undermine and threaten the existence of a healthy and functioning democracy. I'm very pleased to introduce to all of you my good friend Steve Young. Steve is the Global Executive Director of the Co-Roundtable, has been in that role for about 17 years. CRT was founded in 1996 in Lugano, Switzerland. That's where it gets its name. It was founded by an international consortium of corporate CEOs and senior governmental leaders who were seeking to establish a set of shared ethical principles on which we could base a global economy. Pretty ambitious idea. The idea being that it needed to be a really global conversation with people in leadership roles to develop a shared vision of what it means to participate together in the global economy in a way that's fair and serves the best interest of all concerned. Well, what really developed from that initial gathering was a set of principles that became the principles for responsible business that this organization has promulgated ever since. They also went on in subsequent years to develop principles for government, principles for responsible NGOs, and even principles for ownership of wealth. The work of the Roundtable continues under Steve's leadership. They regularly convene meetings around the world at all sorts of places where leaders come together across sectors and have dialogue about what it means to conduct business, to be active participants in a global economy where we are all mutually dependent and where we all have responsibilities to one another. One of the things that I've appreciated about Steve's work is that he's always innovating. He's always looking at what's current and challenging people to keep that conversation fresh and on the front burner. I've had the opportunity actually to work with Steve in a number of ways. I'm privileged to be a fellow of the Co-Roundtable, and in that capacity have worked with Steve to lead dialogues among scholars on issues ranging from the reform of business education to the ways that religion might actually contribute to our thinking about global economics. Steve himself is a deep thinker. He's published a book called Moral Capitalism, which integrates theories of moral philosophy with economics. It's now been published in 5 languages. He is cited in Sandra Waddock's book, The Difference Makers, as one of the 23 people who are responsible for developing the corporate social responsibility movement that we are all so familiar with today. Steve served for 7 years as Dean of the Hamline University School of Law, and earlier was Assistant Dean of the Harvard Law School, his alma mater. He's also a graduate of Harvard College. He's been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a leader of many civic initiatives. Steve has led a fascinating life, to say the least. During the Vietnam War, he served with the Agency for International Development in the Republic of Vietnam. His work there on village development was recognized by former CIA Director William Colby in his book on Vietnam. President Richard Nixon praised Steve's understanding of the realities of the war and asked him to advise him in writing his book, No More Vietnams. And this was in spite of the fact that Steve had offered a history of impeachment that was influential in framing the arguments in the impeachment hearings against Nixon. Well, we won't have the time for it today, and there's one other story that would probably interest you if we did. It seems that Steve, somewhere in the midst of his busy life, discovered an ancient Bronze Age culture in Thailand by tripping over a tree root on a path somewhere in the woods. It turned out that what he discovered was a place where bronze, iron, and pottery were found, and the earliest artifacts dating from 2300 BC were discovered, revealing a Thai culture from ancient times. It is now designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. So this is one of the more interesting people you'll meet. Tonight we'll be talking about one of those topics, and I think it's one that's very relevant to the topic at hand as we think together about democracy. Won't you please join me in welcoming Steve Young.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to be here at Wash Jeff and in Washington County, a part of my country where I've never been before. Grew up on the East Coast, from D.C. up to Boston, moved out to Minnesota a number of years ago, but haven't been, and I learned today, Mr. President, that the Whiskey Rebellion took place fairly near here, and that was of some consequence in creating our government. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a serious time for our country. I want to make some serious remarks to you. I propose to try to give you a framework of an analysis which you can hopefully accept, and it doesn't depend on your Protestant or your Catholic or your partisan or whatever leanings. I want to look at economics, I want to look at sociology, I want to look at history, I want to look at theory. But first, I want to congratulate those at the college who asked John Knapp to come here and be the president. John has a great skill, as you've just heard, in taking, you can either say some of the most elevated thoughts or perhaps some of the most fundamental thoughts and putting them in a context of our lives, either in business or in education or as a friend. And this, I think, is the stuff of leadership. And I think if this is a serious time for our country, it is obviously, therefore, a time for leadership. And I turn to the Jewish tradition for a bit. If not us, who? If not now, when? Let me introduce my remarks with a story about Benjamin Franklin, who I understand was instrumental in the creation of this college. And some of you may have heard this story before. I think it's often overlooked. So the story goes, it's at the end of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. And the document's been signed, all delivered, and Mr. Franklin is walking down the steps outside the hall, and apparently one of the sort of distinguished elderly, matronly women of Philadelphia, well-born, well-educated, is walking by and says, "Well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of a government have you given us?" And Franklin comes right back and says, and this is a very key concept I'll try to get to, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And the point, and there's a serious point here, is the belief of Franklin and Washington and Jefferson and that generation, something called virtue, civic virtue. Republics only survive where the people have virtue. If you lose virtue, you lose your republic. And that goes back to the Romans and Cicero and Aristotle and stuff like that. I'll talk a little bit about that. My proposition to you is that the foundation for a worthwhile democracy is a robust middle class. And virtue is a middle class phenomenon. But before I give you my argument, I want to share some data with you, very fast. Okay, so this is from 1962 to 2016. The bottom 50% of Americans, that's where they are. They're basically 50%, right? That's kind of in the middle, right? The top 1%. Average pre-tax earnings gains, average. The average, the middle class, from 1974 to 2016, roughly flatline. Right, ladies and gentlemen, that means that these people, since 1974, have not enjoyed a real increase in annual earnings. So this is another point. This is, and I think politically, this turned out in November 2016, this is median real earnings, full-time, year-round male. Flatline since 1974. While the total wealth has gone up on a per capita basis. So the difference between these two lines is that the country has been generating a lot more wealth per capita, it just hasn't hit full-time, year-round working males. This is the male-female thing. Again, females lower than males, but coming up. But both of these lines I submit to you are basically flat. Growth for the bottom 50% pre-tax, here. Growth for all adults is 61%. Productivity since 1975, remember the graph? Start the flat line in 74, productivity starting in 75 continues like this. Here's the flat line, hourly compensation for hourly workers. So who has profited from the difference between this cost and this return? CEO salary ratio to average salary. If you were in the stock market, you didn't do so badly, right? At the crash in 2009, the 10 came up here. It's the Dow Jones. But who's in the stock market? This is the different parts of household net worth. Please think about real estate equity, deposits, directly held stocks, indirectly held stocks. Average Americans have a lot of those things. Personal savings rate, starting again, 74. So average Americans are not saving. And this brings it up to 2017. In the last couple of years, consumer spending is higher than disposable personal income. What does that mean? That means everybody's out there on credit cards and home equity loans and whatever else. New company formation. In 2006, created 3.6 million new jobs. 2015 only created 3.8 million new jobs. And remember, new companies tend to be smaller companies, and they tend to hire more middle-class people, right? Retirement savings. Middle class is going to live on Social Security and their retirement savings. As members of my generation, the baby boomers, as we're going to live into our late 80s and early 90s. And I want to thank all the young people out there among you who are going to be working to pay the taxes and take care of me in the way. Trust in institutions. Congress, down there. The presidency is taken together, it's about 30%, Supreme Court's about there. The most trusted institution, you're speaking to someone who came of age in the 60s during the anti-war movement. The most trusted institution in America is the military. This is from 2017. Trust by average Americans in our institutions dropped 37% last year. Interestingly enough, in China, trust went up 27%. And we were supposed to have a democracy? This is the roughest part. See, this is the increasing polarization in Congress. So if you go back to 1949, what you see is a scattergram where the reds and the blues, and there's a whole bunch of people in the middle who can go either way, who can create coalitions, who can make deals. Consider what's happening in the Senate today, where there's a debate about immigration, and it's a zero-sum conflict, right? And here's where we are today. The reds and the blues, there's nobody in the middle. Who's going to cut a deal? When the middle class is strong, democracy is robust. When the middle class does not flourish, similarly, democracy is weak or dysfunctional. To me, the middle class and democracy are covariant. As one goes up, so does the other. But as one goes down, so does the other. So if the middle class goes up, your democracy is going to go up. If your middle class goes down, your democracy is going to go down. It's not a complicated proposition. This has been true since capitalism and constitutional democracy emerged together during the 17th and 18th centuries in England, Scotland, and Holland, and their colonies in North America, such as Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. And the resulting structure of society of capitalism and constitutional democracy has also prospered in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And as middle classes grew across Europe during the 19th century, with the industrialization of those economies, European politics turned more and more democratic and constitutional, even in Russia prior to 1917. And since World War II, we have seen economic growth and the rise of middle classes in countries once autocratic, which thereafter became more democratic. This was the case in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Mexico, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we saw the same mixture of middle classes emerging and political systems becoming more democratic. I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, my proposition. Middle classes and democracy are covariant. Democracy in India, however, is a special case, because their middle classes haven't really grown that much. But the caste system in India and regional patron-client networks provide checks and balances on politicians. In functional equivalence, the middle class orientation towards the rule of law. A sensitive point, Muslim societies. Muslim societies in general have weaker middle classes and less robust democratic institutions and traditions. This is even though Quranic guidance for good governance requires consultation and balance in decision-making and good personal stewardship of power. Similarly, in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, as economic development and modernization has grown in recent decades, middle classes have emerged, but they're not that strong. Tribalism in politics, authoritarian, rent-seeking rulers tend to be the norm in many countries. Middle classes in Ghana and Kenya provide some social power in support of the rule of law and fair elections, but only some. In South increases in wealth and income for Africans has not been notable, and autocratic tendencies are pronounced. The middle class, composed of former Afrikaners and mixed-race people, and some newly successful Africans, has provided a democratic opposition to rent-seeking politicians, but only an opposition. Where the more authoritarian and less tolerant identity politics of populism emerged in industrialized countries, the Brexit movement in the UK, the election of Donald Trump in the US, Marine Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, Viktor Orban in Hungary, the new administration in Poland, and before we saw this with the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany, we almost always see a middle class, or significant segments of the middle class, feeling marginalized or threatened. So a sense of weakness in the middle class seems to be linked to the rise of populism and authoritarianism. Today in the United States, our middle class has been in decline for decades. And our democracy has become dysfunctional. We should therefore be very concerned that if our democracy becomes even more dysfunctional than it is, our middle class will continue to suffer. Our federal Congress for several years now could not pass a proper budget. We got some kind of a compromise the other week. See what happens. The federal Congress cannot agree on health care and cannot reach consensus on who should become new Americans. If we keep our current course, we face two outcomes for the middle class. One will be increasing inequality of wealth and income, with the top doing very well and the bottom surviving on sufferance with low-wage jobs, with support from government entitlements, with no savings and no ownership of real estate. The other alternative may well be an entitlement state, sort of the Bernie Sanders model, if you will, with high taxes on the rich and subsidies for the poor, but little for those in the middle, due to low growth and elimination of middle-class jobs. Either scenario leads to the increasing decline and evaporation of the middle class. I use the word decline, decay. Let me take a moment to reflect on that as an American. I think it is very hard for us Americans to come to grips with the concept of decay and decline in our country, given our history. Many of us, well, I was thinking about the previous generation, a thing my dad used to talk about. He was with the greatest generation, served in the Pacific Theater, and the CBs had the motto. Some of you who are a little bit older may remember the CBs motto, right? The difficult, we do it once. The impossible takes a little longer. Now, who in America talks like that anymore? Many of us share the Christian faith, which promises good to those who work in the way of the Lord. There is not decay and decline. We are marching forward. We are marching upward. There is an end time of goodness which is out there. Why should we worry about decay? Second, many of us were also raised in a culture of optimism, which was based on science and never-ending technical progress. We Americans have created amazing things, and the best is yet to come. Therefore, why should we think about decay? Third, we have come to trust reason and university education. We make ourselves into professionals, and we solve our problems with the application of reason and study. So what is there to hold us back? Tomorrow will always be better than today. And finally, all these beliefs have given us a faith in what some people talk about as American exceptionalism. What may be true for other countries. Rome could collapse. Right? Other things can go bad with other people, but not for us, not Americans. We're special. We were said by John Winthrop to be a city upon the hill. A reference to the Christian tradition, in which the eyes of the world will turn with envy and admiration. And let us remember the words of the Statue of Liberty, as to who we are, right? Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Really? Lincoln believed and said, The United States is the last best hope of man on earth. And he said this when he was fighting a civil war to end slavery and preserve the Union. Horrible times, but he said, we Americans, we need to persevere. And then there was the remark of the Unitarian thinker Theodore Parker, which was reframed by Martin Luther King, which you've heard a lot recently. President Obama used to talk about this a bit. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Don't worry, it's all going to come out all right in the end. To which some other people from other cultures would say, really? Now, I commend to you the very thoughtful recent book by Francis Fukuyama, who's at Stanford, on political decay. He points out that political order can be created and it can be destroyed. His most recent book, he devotes a chapter to the ossification of the U.S. Forest Service as an example of decay in the quality of government in the United States. His culprit is what he calls patrimonialism, which is a sociological term coming down from Max Weber, which is a form of autocratic extraction of personal benefit from public office. I use the office for myself, not for the people, not for the mission, but for me. People come to look on their government jobs as a patrimony, wealth to be used for personal advantage, like an inherited trust fund or an old feudal manor, or the perks of the old Tammany Hall ward boss, whom some of you in politics may have read that. This guy, George Washington Plunkett, who was a ward healer, had this great book about how the machines work, and one of his comments about his fellow Tammany members was, he done seen his opportunities and he took them. So why do many Americans call Washington the slum? Please note that what Frank Fukuyama points to as the cause of decay in government quality is the antithesis of a middle-class enterprise. He's making my case. He's saying that when things go wrong, it's because there's patrimonialism. And patrimonialism is not good, solid middle-class behaviors. As we have shifted towards a more patrimonial system of government, away from middle-class expectations of hard work and good service, the quality of our democracy has declined. So now we need to repair the damage. What to do? George Washington told us what to do. Let us raise a standard to which the wise and the honest may repair. And who better to raise a standard than people in a college who are thinking about what is going on and what should go on. Or as President John Kennedy urged us, and my dad was a New Frontiersman and I was there when he said these words in his inaugural address. With good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love and ask his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. Now, let me go on with my technical argument to give you what I think a definition of a good middle class is, and what is a worthy democracy. I take it that the kind of a middle class which supports a worthy democracy can be described, frankly, largely in Marxist terms. This goes back to some of my professors in college, Sam Beer in particular, particularly professors who studied the English Civil War. And from a Marxist perspective, it is the class which is called the bourgeoisie, which produced capitalism and is sustained by capitalism. That's a middle class. So it's not a definition based on how much money you make. It looks to the way you make your money. So in Karl Marx's version, some of you have sort of studied, of human evolution, first we had village peasant societies. They then evolved into aristocracies, either theocratic, feudal, or sort of centralized imperialists like the ancient Chinese Jinzuan. The aristocracies then gave way to bourgeois capitalism with private property, industrial scale production, and financial intermediation. And then the bourgeoisie would give way to socialism with the government directing the means of production. Now, let me suggest that the most relevant difference between the societies which preceded bourgeois capitalism and those which followed it, such as Lenin's Bolsheviks Mao's Communist Party or Pol Pot's killing field is the reliance of the ruling class on what economists call rent extraction. This, I think, is a very important concept. We don't talk about it very much. It is more in the background of Marxism and some economists. But rent extraction is the money and wealth you get from control of political power. It doesn't really come from business. It doesn't come from investing your money. It's money that you get because of the position you have. It's not determined by free market exchange and bargains between reasonably equal parties for a mutually acceptable price. Rent extraction comes from leverage provided by force, power, or structural position. Those of you who remember the first Godfather movie may remember the injunction from Don Vito Corleone. Make him an offer he can't refuse. That's rent extraction. And in the second movie, if you remember, when the the guy who's going to become, Don Corleone, goes around to the little Italian stores with his guys and goes up to every store and says every week, $5, $10, $5, $10. If you don't do that, somebody might throw a rock through your window and break it, but I can prevent that from happening. But I need money. That's rent extraction. Landlords, they charge rents because they hold legal title. Big Pharma charges rents on the prices of its medicines because they hold intellectual property rights. Right? Google charges those who advertise on its pages not a fair market price because it's a monopoly. It charges what it wants to. Traders on Wall Street, those who brought us the crash of 2008, they profit from speculation, which is rent extraction, and it's not the creation of new wealth. A sensitive point, but I feel the need to say it. Tenured professors live off rents as well, since they are not subject to market discipline. That would take us in an interesting direction, but some other time. But a genuine bourgeoisie, a robust middle class, does not live off rents. Members of the class must risk their property in markets to earn a profit. That's why they were called capitalism. They own capital, which they brought to industry, commerce, and finance, and they could earn a profit, and they could lose their shirts. To measure the social power of a middle class, we should look at stocks of capital and private property and the freedom of markets. If you want to know if your middle class is strong, robust, growing, or weak, you better look at the systemic role it plays. That's kind of the Marxist analysis. The more markets are controlled by cartels or monopolies, or by government regulation, or by some mafia-like organization, the weaker the middle class. If you want to look at just some of you look at the capitalization of the most wealthy companies in America today. Staggering amounts of money. Right? With Google, Alphabet, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. They all have monopoly positions. So today in the United States, many of our most wealthy citizens are not really middle class in Marxist terms. They are salaried bureaucrats working for large institutions, both public and private. They are what the Marxists would call rentiers. They live off rents. Now, there are two other ways to measure the quality of the middle class. One is social capital, and the other is human capital. We talk about these a little bit. These are concepts kind of from sociology, and I don't think they've been developed that well. But where social capital has been developed in relation to the United States, the scholars are not optimistic. Some of you may remember Robert Putnam's book of a number of years ago called Bowling Alone, where he sort of looks at the fact that Americans are very lonely. We don't do much with each other anymore. This is before social media came along. In 1999, Frank Fukuyama wrote a book called The Great Disruption, where he's looking at the disruption of the values core which held Americans in trust with each other. And then Charles Murray, a couple of years ago, wrote a book called Coming Apart. I think it was 2012, where he has a lot of slides like this, and he predicts, back in 2012, he predicted that things are going to get worse, not better. Social capital is the stock of civil society organizations, interpersonal networks, family wholesomeness, personal concern for the common good, trust in other people and institutions. The data I gave you on trust. We lost our levels of trust in institutions dropped 37% last year. That is a cancer eating away at our social capital. The disciplines of sociology, anthropology, and social psychology tell us about the quality of social capital. As a rule, social capital capital is higher in societies with free markets, private property, and constitutional governments, a free press, and open structures of culture and educational achievement. Such societies rely more on spontaneous social dynamics for their order and progress than on police surveillance and administrative regulation. There's another link here between the social capital that makes for a good, strong middle class and the quality of your government. Dysfunctional societies with high crime, pervasive corruption, favoritism in and around their governance, family breakdown, tribal and sectarian isms, and generic lack of trust tend to have low social capital. Many failed states, such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, have low stocks of social capital and not very good democracies. Now, what also eats away at social capital are self-referential, narcissistic values, conceits, and behaviors. These decompose social capital on one hand, and they prevent it from being formed. If I live just for myself alone, I'm not a particularly social person. I'm not particularly interested in social capital. I'm interested in me. People are less and less willing under these circumstances. It's a social pathology. People are less and less willing to rely on others, to be fair, to do their part, to be responsible. If I'm not going to trust you to be fair, to do your part, to be responsible, why should I care about you? Why should I see us as a common enterprise? Why not just take care of myself? A middle-class life, classically, however, depends on reciprocity, work and personal responsibility. That's what makes middle classes strong. That's what drives capitalism, and that's what drives democracy. What Alexis de Tocqueville, in a brilliant book, those of you interested in understanding our country and its history, I do recommend to you Tocqueville's Democracy in America. It's a bit thick, but it will reward you. He talked about the habits of the heart, which sustain democracy in the young American Republic. These are hard to come by when narcissism and self-referential behaviors become the accepted social norms. Now next, human capital. Human capital may not be that determinative of a middle class because you can find talented, well-educated people in all systems. You find them in dictatorships and you find them in aristocracies. You may have been reading recently about the North Koreans apparently have really good hackers. Right? The Chinese are producing some very, very brilliant people. Those are not democracies. The World Economic Forum, you can look at this, has a website which ranks countries for the quality of their human capital. They're putting some metrics on human capital. Now in the United States, I have other slides we didn't have time to show, but what are the trends which have been undermining our human capital over the last 20 years? You all know the rise in attention deficit disorders. Autism, you've seen the numbers since the early 90s. Slope lines are going up like this. Opioid addictions. I read last year we had 42,000 Americans died last year of opioids. In the Vietnam War, total, for many years, we lost 58,000. Rates of divorce and, interestingly, people living alone. Young people and older people living alone without any companions. We've had flatline educational achievement, even with rising expenditures. So we're not educating our people very well, and we have all these other things going on. And we've also seen some recent commentary you may have had of the impact on young people of social media. There was recently a study that correlated the more hours a young person watches social media, the more unhappy they are and the more depressed they are. If you want to make them happier, more engaged people, take away the computers and cell phones. Next, let me talk a bit about democracy. What is a democracy? The word we throw around a lot. Now, the Marxist vision is that democracy is the form of state governance appropriate for bourgeois capitalism, which has the middle class as its social and cultural expression. So, for example, if you have a communist society with no middle class, you wiped out the middle class, you don't need a democracy. Right? You have a one-party system, it's a state-governed dictatorship kind of system. Because democracy in this Marxist tradition is for a certain kind of social structure, a middle-class social structure. Now, prior to the emergence of capitalism in the middle class, they're very hard to find democracies. You go go back through history. We've got a couple of exceptions. Athens, for a little while, and lost it. Roman Republic, until they lost it. Venice, for a long time, until they created an elite. And the Swiss cantons. That's not very many, if you ask me. In the post-capitalist societies, under one-party rule, there is no democracy. The alignment of the masses with the vanguard party in total control of the state is created and managed by the party, according to its vision of the good for all. I have just described to you China under Xi Jinping. You may have seen that the Party Congress, Xi Jinping thought, has been placed in the Constitution of the People's Republic of China as the guidance for all Chinese. However, in capitalist settings with middle classes, government is generally responsive to social forces because capitalists and middle class people like transactions, they like deals, they're workmanlike, they do not demand too much, they accept win-win transactions, and they accept provisional incremental steps. They are less ideological than all rent-extracting elites. Now, what I consider to be a worthy democracy was early described by Aristotle. He's looking at the different systems of the Greek cities, and what he points out was checks and balances, not the rule of the mass, the demos, not the rule of the people with a capital P, because that tends to go to extremes and immediately falls into some kind of tyranny. So what Aristotle wanted was a mixed system. If you just go to the people, you get mobocracy, you get a temper-tossed, emotional, fickle, and violent society where people can't trust each other. The end result is the British philosopher Thomas Hobbes, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Another man who came along who influenced our ideas on a good democracy was Cicero at the end of the Roman Republic. And again, he was talking about a balance of power between the Senate, the tribunes, the people, where no one person or no one faction had too much power. Now, both Aristotle and Cicero, who was a Stoic in his philosophy, advocated for democracy, a different kind of mechanism, not the law alone, not checks and balances, but personal character or virtue. You need something special in this system to make the rule of law work, to make the checks and balances work, and that's the character of the individuals who are in there. And you cannot legislate their character, right? It's got to come from somewhere, inside them or from somewhere. Now, Aristotle's notion of virtue was that it was a mean between extremes. If you go too far, dare I say, towards the blue, or dare I say, towards the red, you lose the mean. You lose the middle, you lose the balance, and your system spins out of control. But Aristotle was not alone in this. Let me remind you of the Buddha in his first sermon. And he spoke of the Dharma as a kind of sustainability, holding us up in life that we can go forward no matter what happens. And the wheel of the Dharma was the metaphor for rolling along a course in a straight line, not slipping this way and not going this way, but keeping to the Noble Eightfold Way, right thought, right action, things like that. In China, I give you the Tao Te Ching, with this notion of following the Tao. You don't follow yourself, you don't follow your ego, you don't follow your emotions, you don't give in to your angers and your fears. You got to follow the Tao, which is some external force keeping you in a middle way. Mencius Mencius has a very powerful work calling on officials, people in positions of power, to be responsible, to have virtue, to live up to their responsibilities. They had their position as king or father or mother because of their responsibilities, not to make money or to boss people around or to exploit or hurt people. Interestingly, Quran gives us guidance about the mizan, the balance, and exposes corruption and abuse of power as profoundly wrong, as infidelity to God, to God's good intentions for humanity and his creation. Coming down to our country, we have Madison in the 10th Federalist paper, bringing the same idea of checks and balances into his notion of a republic, balancing the excesses of faction. And what do we have today in our country other than factions, with nobody there to check and balance the excesses? The framers of the Constitution relied on the people having sufficient character or virtue, remember Franklin, please, to let their reason prevail over their momentary disappointments, their greed, fears, and other passions. Federalist 55 says, quote, "As there is a degree of depravity in mankind, which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust." In other words, there's something about us we can go off the rails. We're not going to be good all the time. That's in us. But, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify a certain portion of esteem and confidence. There are other things about us which allow us to control slipping to the dark side. Think of all the Star Wars movies, right? These are metaphors. Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader, the dark side, versus somebody who's got virtue, the good side of the force, which is internal. Again, character is required, as Franklin said. Let me borrow a metaphor from Emily Dickinson, because I kind of like the way she puts things very lightly. The heart is capital of the mind. The mind is a single state. The heart and mind together make up a single continent. One is the population. Numerous enough. This ecstatic nation seek. It is yourself. Each one of us. And then, I know some of you guys may know the Bonnie Raitt song, "Baby, It's Down to You." You come around crying that you just can't win. You step out on the track in the pouring rain, and when you get run over, well, you blame the train. Everywhere you look, they're trying to do you in. It's always the same, baby. Somebody else is to blame, baby. You still ain't got a clue the way it all rolls down. Because what you're dishing out is coming back around. Don't you think that you've had enough? Ain't it time to get a different view? You can't just wait around for what you want. It's all about the way you choose. Ain't nobody else that can make things right. Baby, it's down to you. Now, the intellectual disciplines that you have here in Wash Jeff for the study of character are social psychology, cultural anthropology. There are personality profiles such as the Myers-Briggs typology. There's the DISC assessment, the 5-factor model of personality traits, and the Gallup Strength Finder for personal skills. You have Hofstede's national values charts. You have identity formation as proposed by Eric Erikson, the positive psychology of Martin Seligman, the inner-directed and other-directed personality types of my mentor David Reisman, and more. We can understand this, we can look at it, we can talk about it, we can do things about it. The guidance is there. Now let me remind you of Martin Luther King in the March on Washington. What was his line about the dream? That my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Are we there yet? Now, I argue that a middle class is best conditioned to value and sustain democracy. It has as its vocation the nourishing of pluralism and the decentralization of power. Economic independence in middle classes permits more secure social status. With such a status, psychological fortitude sets in. Such an individual is disposed to value virtue and to acquire it as a personal psychosocial possession. But if the data that I gave you is true, what's the secure social status of our middle class these days? Are they still predisposed to value virtue and want to acquire it for themselves? I've argued that middle classes and democracy are covariant. The middle class is the product of both economic structure and cultural values. One can't have the culture, prejudices, and values of an aristocrat or a peasant and be happy in the middle class. You've got to be a middle class person to be happy with this kind of a character. Values, therefore, become the necessary foundation for both bourgeois free market capitalism and constitutional democracy. With regard to economics and capitalism, let us not forget, what most of us forget, is that Adam Smith's first book was not about economics. It was about character. It was on the theory of the moral sentiments. He wrote about the possibility of every person, young, old, etc., developing good moral character. And he also presumed that that would be taken over into business. If people have their character, you don't leave it at home on Monday morning when you go off to work. Now, let us consider those Americans who, due to slavery, segregation, and as some of my African-American friends say, welfare state dependency, have never fully been part of the middle class. Is it a coincidence that they have also been marginalized in democratic politics, education, and mainstream culture? Another friend, Bayard Rustin, some of you may remember, is a civil rights leader, Bayard took the position that economics was most important in achieving equality for this community after the laws were passed. Reform of laws would not be enough. He was of the school which argued that after the Civil War, the failure of the federal government to deliver to former slaves 40 acres and a mule caused the failure of Reconstruction, which was to try to build democracy. They couldn't create a middle class for the ex-slaves. They couldn't get a democracy in the South, right, like Jim Crow. There's indulge me in a minute, a defining moment when I was thinking about this. So Cicero, I mentioned Cicero. And he lived his life in the decline of the Roman Republic, the end of Roman democracy. As you may remember, he was killed at the end by soldiers under the orders of Mark Antony, because he was an obstreperous guy arguing against Antony and Octavian, the new imperial powers. So before that, in actually a letter he wrote in June 59 BC to his friend Atticus, who was on business in Greece, and Cicero defined, he didn't see it in advance, he was just commenting on what's going on in Rome, and he defined the cause of the coming collapse. And what he's writing about, the first triumvirate, those of you who study Roman history, you know, these three guys, Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, they create kind of like a little dictatorship within the formalism of the Senate and democracy. And the Roman elite is running around criticizing. But these guys are running the show. They're fixing juries, all this kind of stuff. And so Cicero writes, while our ability to make critical judgments is completely free, our virtue is in chains. Nos virtutum addegata est. Our virtue, our ability to maintain our republic is chained. We don't have it anymore. And it's a straight line from 59 BC down to the end. In other words, those responsible for defending the constitutional order had lost their moral courage and the concomitant resolve to act for the common good. If we look around us today in our country, whose virtue is chained and whose virtue is not chained? You can lose virtue. Emily Dickinson again. I held a jewel in my fingers and went to sleep. The day was warm. The winds were prosy. I said, Pilky. I woke and chid my honest fingers. The gem was gone. And now an amethyst remembrance is all I own. The substance is gone, but I remember what I used to have. Reflecting on his times in 1968, Irving Kristol, in a lecture, presciently wrote, quote, who can deny that in the United States today, as never before in its history, there is a vast unease about the prospects of the Republic? It's 50 years ago. None of these problems taken by itself seem insoluble, but taken together, they create a condition and are creating habits of mind that threaten the civic bourgeois culture bequeathed to us by Western civilization. In what I consider to be his most wise farewell address, Washington advised, quote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable support. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education, which you guys are doing here, on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric." What are we losing as our middle class declines? First, we are losing civic virtue. Second, we are losing faith in one another. Third, we are losing our ability to work together. On the other hand, what are we gaining? A culture biased in favor of money, celebrity, and the perks of power, where winning is the only thing. More centralization of power in hierarchies, corporate and governmental, so that our legal culture is more all-knowing rule by law and less use of the rule of law. It's the rule of law which values decentralization of power and individual autonomy. We're gaining more rent-seeking. Look at the concentration in every industry across our economy. We're more concentrated now than we were 20 years ago. A politics more bitter and more polarized, leading to gridlock and intolerance in government. Let me conclude. Jefferson had this to say on virtue in his first inaugural address. "Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Let us restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things. And let us reflect that, having banished from our land that religious intolerance under which mankind so long lived and suffered, we have yet gained little if we countenance a political intolerance as despotic, as wicked, and capable of as bitter and bloody persecutions. But every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or to change its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it." With this same insight, Washington wrote this prayer for his country. "Almighty God, we make our earnest prayer that thou wilt incline the hearts of the citizens to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another and for their fellow citizens of the United States of America at large. And finally, that thou wilt most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation." Now I'd like to close again with Emily Dickinson and bringing it back to you. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee. One clover and a bee. And reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, criticism? Observation. Refutation.
Yes, what role do you think the education system has in the polarization of the wealth classes in America today?
To be blunt,
Yes.
about 75% fault. If our education system were better, we'd have more virtue. If we had more virtue, we wouldn't be so polarized. So that then takes us back to what's happened to our education system over the last 30, 40 years. That's a big topic. No, I mean, what are the three institutions which classically, and more contemporary sociologists, cultural anthropologists have said shape character? I mean, basically family, church, and education. And then society, civil society. So what's the status of the American family? Loosely speaking, I'm not going to answer. Strong, tight, loving families. My generation, baby boomers. How do we treat our parents? I saw in the paper yesterday about the coming political struggle between millennials and baby boomers over money. As baby boomers, as we age out, we're going to demand that the federal government take care of us. Right? Health care, retirement, et cetera, et cetera. Millennials, they have other things. They're seeing all these old people get the money, and they're the ones who suffered from this flatline, right? So families, that's within families. Churches, situation with churches these days. Your president has written a book, how the churches have failed the business community by not reaching out to them, as Adam Smith would have done, with issues of morality and ethics and responsibility and fiduciary duties and servanthood. To say, you can do this, you should be doing this. And then education. And I come from higher education. I've seen it morph over the last 30, 40 years. Let me leave it there, and it's for you guys to solve.
Much of the information you presented indicated that this kind of crisis of the middle class goes back to about the 1970s. This is when we see a big gap between productivity and wage gain, when wages for the bottom 50% flat line. So my question is, what happened?
I don't really know. I mean, I'm a lawyer, right? A historian of jurisprudence and stuff like that. What the two things? First of all, I stumbled on some of these graphs by accident 4 or 5 years ago, when I was sort of looking for co-roundtable work, and they keep, if you look for them, you can find them. So my question was that, what happened? Secondly, how come nobody's been talking about this? I mean, this is not something that happened, 24 months ago. So where are the political leaders? Where are the great professors in my old alma mater, Harvard? Right? Where are religious leaders? Where are college presidents speaking out about this? To me, something like this has to be structural. So I'm looking to structure this, and you've got a couple of things. You've got increasing concentration, but I suspect, I'm talking about, so one of our senior mentors is Paul Volcker, who used to be chairman of the Fed, and Paul is focused more and more on what they call financialization of the economy. I had some other charts, there are too many to bring, where basically the percentage of our economic income and everything that goes to the financial sector has gone from something like this to like this. And if you look at where income goes, it goes to people in finance. The question Paul asks is, what good has finance done for everybody else? And most of finance is trading and speculation using borrowed funds. And finance, since the Wall Street was sort of gyrating last week, right? Why? Primarily, I mean, I think, because people suddenly woke up to the fact that the central banks of the world are no longer going to be flooding the world economy with liquidity. It's the central banks and liquidity which have been keeping the markets up to the advantage of the wealthy. So you have all these trend lines helping some people, and ordinary, sort of what we used to say, working stiffs, what are you going to leg up? I mean, how many young people, those of you who are older, your children, they're in good shape to buy houses. They got college debt, they can come up with $25,000, $50,000 down for a house. What are their savings? How much cash they have in savings? They probably got 5 credit cards, right? And they got balances on each of the credit cards. And they have education debt. And a whole bunch of them are living with mom and dad. So, I mean, these things have been going on. I think structure, and where is the intellectual leadership to pick up these clues and write some really powerful book that will cause the nation to sit up and wake up.
In your speech, you made a brief correlation between capitalism, monopoly, and that. My question to you is, if we were to limit monopolies and create more diversity in terms of expanding the amount of institutional corporation action for wealth, would that in turn create more economic opportunity, and would that lead to like a more expansive?
That would be the economic theory. And another factor here is we have the legal tools on the books. Basically the antitrust laws from a period in our history, the so-called Gilded Age, 1880s, 1890s, when we had similar wealth at the top, poor people at the bottom, and concentration of economic power. They busted up John Rockefeller's big network of oil companies. But you may have seen recently, over the last 6 months, people are starting to wake up to Google and Amazon and others and saying, why aren't we using the antitrust laws against them? And nobody has an answer. Another factor with those companies, the tech companies, you can also have read over the last couple of years that, let's say you're a really bright guy in IT and you've got some idea for some new app or this or that, and it's fantastic. It'd be very hard for you to get any money. People are not going to want to invest in you. Why? Because as soon as you become a threat to Facebook or Google or Microsoft, they'll buy you out. You will become very wealthy. They'll pay, just look at the prices of the companies, they'll pay a couple of $1 billion. Why? To make sure you're no threat. One person said, if we just forced Google and Microsoft to divest itself, like Facebook and Instagram were like this, right? What if they were two separate companies competing with each other? Prices would go down for customers, and there would be new opportunities for new startups. So why are we doing it? Good question. Mr. President, thank you very much.
That was a tour de force of ideas, wasn't it? This is what you can count on from Steve Young. He pulls ideas from a lot of different places. He does a pretty good job of weaving them together into something new to make us think. If that didn't make you think at some point in the evening, you probably weren't paying attention because there was a lot there to chew on. So thank you for that. You've given us exactly what we were looking for, which is an opportunity to reflect more deeply on the question before us about democracy. I want to remind you that we're only about halfway through. Tomorrow evening, we will be over in Olin in the theater, and our speaker is actually with us this evening. Dr. Richard Carmerdine will be speaking. He is the former president of Corpus Christi College at the University of Oxford, a noted historian and author who specializes in early American history, brings a bit of a British perspective to the conversation about our history. I think you'll enjoy it immensely. I hope you'll be there tomorrow evening for that presentation. We'll be thinking about some of the big issues about what happened during those early days of the country as we tried to establish a democracy based on the values that our founders articulated for us. And then the following day at lunchtime, Richard will actually be right here in this room hosting a lunch and learn conversation about his new book, Abraham Lincoln's Humor. Richard has written a number of books on Abraham Lincoln, and that promises to be an interesting and entertaining conversation because I think we're all familiar to some degree with the fact that Abraham Lincoln used humor very effectively in his work as a leader. And then tomorrow, or Thursday evening, we'll be in this room for a panel discussion, and that discussion will feature faculty and staff, and we'll be talking about the persons of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and their legacies and how we view those from a 21st century perspective today here at our college. So lots more on tap. Thanks for being with us this evening. I hope you found it time well spent. I know I did. Good night.